The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Park City, Montana Territory, as Katherine Vaughn clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, desperately trying to hide the slight swell of her belly beneath her dress. Her heart pounded with each step toward the general store, terrified someone would notice, someone would know. At just 20 years old, unmarried and pregnant in 1876, she had become everything a proper woman shouldn't be. 3 months had passed since Thomas had disappeared with her family's savings and the hollow promises of marriage. 3 months of hiding morning sickness from her employers at the boarding house. 3 months of growing terror as her secret became increasingly impossible to conceal. "Good morning, Miss Vaughn," called Mr. Peterson from his barbershop. "Looking a bit pale today." "Everything all right?" Katherine forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a touch under the weather, sir. Nothing to worry about." She quickened her pace, eyes fixed on the wooden boardwalk beneath her boots. The shame burned worse than any physical ailment could. In a town like Park City, a woman's reputation was everything, and hers would soon lie in tatters. The general store bell jingled as she entered, the familiar scent of coffee beans, leather, and tobacco filling her nostrils. Mrs. Holloway stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes missing nothing as Katherine approached. "Just some thread and a bit of ginger for tea," Katherine said softly, placing her coins on the counter. "Ginger again?" Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows raised. "That's the 3rd time this month." Still feeling poorly, Katherine nodded stiffly, avoiding the older woman's gaze. "It helps settle my stomach." "Does it now?" Mrs. Holloway's voice had an edge to it that made Katherine's blood run cold. "You know, my daughter had the same trouble when she was in your condition." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to deny it, but no sound came out. The store suddenly seemed airless. "Mrs. Lancaster is looking for a new girl at the boarding house," Mrs. Holloway continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I heard she let one go just yesterday, someone in a delicate situation." Katherine's vision blurred with tears. It had happened then. Mrs. Lancaster had discovered her secret and fired her. She had nowhere to go, no job, no family, and only enough money to last a week at most. "I don't know what you mean," Katherine whispered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. The bell above the door jingled again, and heavy boot steps crossed the wooden floor. Katherine kept her head down, willing whoever had entered to conduct their business quickly and leave. "Afternoon, Mrs. Holloway," came a deep voice that Katherine recognized immediately. "I'll need some supplies for the ranch. Frederick Ellis." Everyone in Park City knew him, the owner of the Silvercrest Ranch just outside of town, a man of few words but respected by all. At 32, he'd built one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory through sheer determination and hard work. "Mr. Ellis." "Of course." Mrs. Holloway's tone transformed to cheerful respect. "Your usual order." "And some extra coffee this time," he replied. Katherine tried to make herself invisible, hoping to slip out while they discussed his order. But as she turned, her elbow knocked a display of canned peaches, sending one rolling across the floor with a clatter. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, bending to retrieve it, then straightening too quickly. The room spun alarmingly and she grabbed the counter's edge. "Miss, are you all right?" Frederick Ellis's voice seemed to come from far away. Before she could answer, darkness crowded the edges of her vision and Katherine felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the floor. Through the haze of near unconsciousness, she was vaguely aware of being lifted, of a deep voice giving commands, of movement and then fresh air on her face. When Katherine opened her eyes, she was sitting on a bench outside the store. Frederick Ellis crouched before her, his expression concerned beneath the brim of his hat. "There you are," he said, his voice gentler than she would have expected from such a formidable man. "Take it slow now." "I'm so sorry," Katherine whispered, mortification washing over her as she realized what had happened. "I haven't eaten today, that's all." His blue eyes studied her face. "Mrs. Holloway's getting you some water." Katherine nodded, unable to meet his gaze. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, then jerked away when she realized what she'd done. Frederick's gaze followed the movement, his expression unchanging. Behind them, whispers had already begun as townspeople noticed Katherine Vaughn sitting with Frederick Ellis, her face pale as death. Mrs. Holloway appeared with a glass of water, her expression now a mixture of concern and judgment. "Here you are, dear, though I suspect water isn't what you truly need." The pointed comment wasn't lost on Frederick. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you for your assistance, Mrs. Holloway," he said, his tone making it clear the woman was dismissed. The storekeeper hesitated, then retreated back inside, but not before giving Katherine a look that spoke volumes about how quickly news would spread. "Where do you live, Miss Vaughn? I'll escort you home." Katherine's eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. I have nowhere. Mrs. Lancaster let me go from the boarding house this morning." Understanding dawned in his eyes. In a town the size of Park City, secrets didn't stay secret for long. He'd likely heard the whispers, seen the way certain women looked at Katherine with growing suspicion. "And the father?" he asked quietly. "Gone," she whispered. "He left for California 3 months ago with what little money I had saved." Frederick stood abruptly, his imposing frame blocking the sun. For a moment he said nothing, just surveyed the town's main street with its saloons, shops, and the curious eyes already watching them. "Miss Vaughn," he said finally, his voice low but clear, "I have a proposition for you." Katherine looked up at him, confusion replacing her shame momentarily. "My sister Rebecca has been running my household since our parents passed, but she's marrying next month and moving to Helena. I need someone to manage the ranch house. Mr. Ellis, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The position comes with room and board, good wages," and he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "a certain amount of privacy away from town." Katherine stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "Why would you offer this to me? You barely know me." His expression softened slightly. "I know enough. You've worked hard at the boarding house for 2 years without complaint. Mrs. Lancaster speaks highly of your character despite recent developments." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. "People will talk," she whispered. "People always talk," he replied with a shrug. "The question is whether you care more about their words or your well-being." He nodded toward her midsection, so slightly it was barely perceptible. "And that of your child." Katherine took a shuddering breath. She had no illusions about what awaited an unmarried mother in Montana territory. Destitution at best, prostitution at worst. Frederick Ellis was offering her salvation, even if it came with its own complications. "When would I start?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Now," he said simply. "Get your things. My wagon's out front." An hour later, Katherine sat beside Frederick on the wagon bench, her small trunk of belongings secured in the back as they left Park City behind. The late afternoon sun bathed the rolling grasslands in gold, the distant mountains blew shadows against the sky. Despite her exhaustion and fear, Katherine couldn't help but notice the beauty surrounding them. "It's about 5 miles to Silvercrest," Frederick said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town. "Not far, but far enough." Katherine nodded, stealing a glance at his profile. He wasn't traditionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his strong features, the quiet confidence in the set of his shoulders. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Ellis?" she finally asked. He was silent for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "My mother found herself in a similar situation once, before she met my father." His hands tightened on the reins. "She wasn't fortunate enough to find help." "What happened to her?" "She survived," he said simply. "But barely. She never forgot the cruelty she endured, taught me that a person's character isn't measured by their mistakes, but by how they face them." Katherine looked down at her hands. "I've made a terrible mistake." "Have you?" Frederick glanced at her. "Trusting someone who proved unworthy seems more like their failing than yours." His words, spoken without judgment, loosened something tight in Katherine's chest. For the first time in months, she took a full breath without the crushing weight of shame. They crested a small hill, and the Silvercrest Ranch spread before them, a large main house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, a barn and corrals where horses grazed in the evening light. In the distance, cattle dotted the pasture land that stretched toward the mountains. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed. "It's home," Frederick replied, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shielding her eyes against the setting sun. She was a few years older than Katherine, with the same coloring as Frederick, dark hair and striking blue eyes. "That's Rebecca, my sister," Frederick explained as they pulled up to the house. Rebecca Ellis approached the wagon, curiosity evident in her expression. "Fred, you're back early." "And with company." Frederick jumped down from the wagon, then offered his hand to help Katherine descend. "Rebecca, this is Miss Katherine Vaughn. She'll be taking over the household duties when you leave." Rebecca's eyebrows rose, her gaze sweeping over Katherine with undisguised assessment. "Is that so? Well, that's unexpected." Katherine stood awkwardly, feeling the weight of the other woman's scrutiny. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Ellis." "Likewise," Rebecca replied, though her tone suggested she was reserving judgment. She turned to her brother. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside." Frederick nodded. "Show Miss Vaughn to the guest room first. She's had a trying day and could use some rest." Katherine followed Rebecca into the house, acutely aware of the tension in the other woman's shoulders. The interior was surprisingly refined for a bachelor's home, well-crafted furniture, colorful rugs over polished floorboards, and shelves lined with books. "The guest room is this way," Rebecca said, leading her down a hallway. "It's small but comfortable." The room was indeed small but charming, with a narrow bed covered by a patchwork quilt, a washstand, and a window overlooking a garden. "Thank you," Katherine said softly. "It's lovely." Rebecca lingered in the doorway, her expression softening slightly. "You must be tired. Rest for now. We can talk at dinner." Left alone, Katherine sat heavily on the bed, the events of the day washing over her in a wave that left her trembling. She placed a protective hand over her stomach. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. From the kitchen, she could hear the murmur of voices, Rebecca's rising occasionally in what sounded like protest, Frederick's remaining steady and low. Katherine couldn't make out the words, but she could imagine the conversation. What respectable man brings a pregnant, unmarried woman into his home? As darkness fell, Katherine washed her face in the basin, straightened her dress, and gathered her courage to face whatever awaited her at the dinner table. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of beef stew when Katherine entered. Rebecca stood at the stove, stirring a pot while Frederick set the table. They both looked up at her approach. "Feeling better?" Frederick asked. "Yes, thank you," she replied, though in truth her nerves were frayed to breaking. "Sit, please," Rebecca said, her earlier coolness replaced by a guarded politeness. "Dinner's ready." The meal began in awkward silence. Katherine took small bites, though the stew was delicious and she was famished. "I've explained your situation to my sister," Frederick said finally, his direct approach startling both women. Catherine's spoon clattered against her bowl. "I see. Fred believes you were taken advantage of," Rebecca said carefully. "That's one way to put it," Catherine replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Thomas, he promised marriage, said he needed money to secure our future. I believed him." Rebecca's expression softened fractionally. "Men can be persuasive when they want something." "Not all men," Frederick countered. "No," Rebecca conceded. "Not all." She studied Catherine for a moment. "My brother says you worked at Lancaster's boarding house," Catherine nodded, "for nearly 2 years. And before that, I grew up in Boston. My parents died of influenza when I was 18. I came west because there was nothing left for me there." Rebecca's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Loss was something she understood. "And now," Catherine met her gaze directly, "now I find myself in a position I never imagined. But I am not without skills or determination, Miss Ellis. I can cook, clean, manage accounts. I worked hard for Mrs. Lancaster, and I will work just as hard here." "And when the baby comes?" Rebecca asked, glancing at Catherine's midsection. Catherine's throat tightened. "I will find a way to manage." Frederick set down his fork with deliberate care. "I have a further proposition, Miss Vaughn." Both women turned to him in surprise. "I believe it would be beneficial to all concerned if you were to become my wife." The words hung in the air, stunning in their simplicity and enormity. "What?" Catherine and Rebecca spoke in unison. Frederick continued as if proposing marriage were no more remarkable than discussing the weather. "A marriage of convenience, to be clear. You need protection and security. I need someone to run this household. The child needs a name." Catherine stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Mr. Ellis, you can't possibly—" "I can, and I have," he interrupted. "It's a practical solution." "Practical," Rebecca found her voice. "Fred, this is marriage we're talking about, not a business arrangement." "Is it not both?" he countered. "Especially in these parts." Catherine shook her head, overwhelmed. "You don't know me. I don't know you. This is unusual, yes," Frederick acknowledged. "But consider the alternatives, Miss Vaughn." The alternatives. Catherine had lain awake many nights considering them, each more desperate than the last. A distant cousin she'd never met in St. Louis who might take her in. Seeking work in a larger city where her condition might go unremarked upon longer. Giving up her child. "People will assume the child is yours," Catherine said quietly. Frederick nodded. "Let them. They'll count the months and know it isn't. Some might. Most won't care enough to do the arithmetic." His expression remained impassive. "Either way, the child will have my name and protection." Rebecca looked between them, her initial shock giving way to thoughtful consideration. "It's not the craziest idea my brother has ever had," she admitted reluctantly. "Though it's close." Catherine's mind raced. A marriage in name only to a man she barely knew, the security of a home and name for her child, an escape from certain ruin. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do this?" Frederick's gaze was steady. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because my mother raised me to believe that when you have the power to help, you should. Because this child deserves a chance." His answer struck her with its sincerity. Not pity or desire or social obligation, but a straightforward moral certainty that left little room for argument. If I were to consider this," Catherine said slowly, "what would you expect from me, as a wife? Respect, honesty, care of this home and its occupants." He paused. "Nothing more than you're comfortable giving." The implication was clear. This would not be a traditional marriage in all senses. "And if someday you meet someone you truly wish to marry?" Catherine asked. A shadow of something unreadable crossed his face. "I've had opportunity enough for that." I'm content with my life as it is." Rebecca watched her brother with a mixture of exasperation and affection. Fred has always been different. When he sets his mind to something, there's no changing it. Katherine took a deep breath, weighing the most unexpected proposal she could have imagined. "May I have some time to consider?" Frederick nodded. "Of course. But not too long. People in town already saw us leave together. Speculation will have begun." The reality of her situation crashed over her anew. In Park City, a ruined reputation meant more than social ostracism. It meant no work, no shelter, no future. "I'll have your answer in the morning," she promised. Sleep proved elusive that night. Katherine lay awake in the unfamiliar room, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, distant cattle lowing, the creak of the house settling, the soft whistle of wind through the eaves. Frederick Ellis's proposal echoed in her mind, along with his unexpected kindness. A marriage of convenience. A name for her child. A home. Could she do it? Marry a virtual stranger out of necessity rather than love. But then, what choice did she have? The child growing inside her deserved better than a mother ostracized and destitute. By morning, Katherine's decision was made. She found Frederick in his study, already reviewing ledgers despite the early hour. "Mr. Ellis," she said from the doorway. He looked up, setting aside his work. "Miss Vaughn." "I accept your proposal," Katherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I have conditions." Frederick gestured to the chair across from him. "I'm listening." Katherine sat, folding her hands in her lap. "First, I want to contribute meaningfully to this household, not just as a housekeeper but as a partner in its management." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised by this request. "Second, I want your word that you will treat this child as your own in public and private, with no distinction or mention of its true parentage." "You have it," he said without hesitation. "And third," her voice wavered slightly, "if either of us should ever develop feelings for another, we will discuss it honestly and determine a civilized path forward." Frederick studied her for a long moment. "Reasonable conditions all. I accept them." He rose from his desk. "I'd like to add one of my own." "Yes." "That we proceed with this marriage quickly before speculation in town grows wilder." Katherine swallowed. "How quickly?" "Today, if possible. Pastor Wilson could come out to the ranch this afternoon." "Today," she echoed faintly. "That is, very soon." "Too soon?" he asked, a hint of genuine concern in his voice. Katherine thought of returning to Park City unwed, facing the whispers and stares. "No," she decided. "Not too soon." By noon, Rebecca had helped Katherine prepare for what would surely be the strangest wedding in Montana territory. They'd found a dress of pale blue silk in Rebecca's wardrobe that, with quick alterations, fit Katherine well enough to disguise her condition. "It's not white," Rebecca said apologetically as she pinned Katherine's hair. "White would seem dishonest under the circumstances," Katherine replied. Rebecca met her eyes in the mirror. "You know, I wasn't sure about this at first. It seemed like madness." She secured a pin. "But my brother is a good man, Katherine. The best I know, he won't mistreat you." "I believe that," Katherine said softly, "though I don't understand why he's doing this." Rebecca's hand stilled. "Our mother had a child before she met our father, a little boy. The circumstances were similar to yours." Her voice grew quieter. "The child died of fever when Fred was young, but he remembers him. Remembers how our mother always said that boy never had a chance because of how the world treated him and her." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "He never mentioned a brother. He wouldn't. Fred keeps his feelings close." Rebecca squeezed her shoulders gently. "But now you understand." Pastor Wilson arrived mid-afternoon, clearly bewildered by the hasty summons but too respectful of Frederick Ellis to question it openly. The ranch hands were assembled as witnesses, along with Rebecca and the cook, Mrs. Fenton, who had hastily prepared a small wedding cake. The ceremony took place in the ranch house parlor. Katherine stood beside Frederick before the fireplace, trying to still her trembling hands as Pastor Wilson led them through their vows. Frederick's voice was steady and sure as he promised to honor and cherish her. Katherine's own vows came out barely above a whisper. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Wilson concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Frederick leaned down and placed the lightest of kisses on her cheek, his hand gentle at her elbow. It was done. Katherine Vaughn had become Katherine Ellis. The small gathering offered congratulations, most of the ranch hands clearly confused by their boss's sudden marriage but loyal enough not to question it openly. Mrs. Fenton served cake and coffee, and Pastor Wilson departed with a generous donation for the church and a slightly puzzled expression. By evening, the ranch had settled back into its routine, the extraordinary events of the day absorbed into the rhythm of daily life. Katherine stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold when she heard Frederick step behind her. "Mrs. Ellis," he said formally. She turned, still startled by the new name. "Mr. Ellis." "I've had your things moved to the main bedroom," he said. "I'll take the room down the hall." "Oh," Katherine blinked, relieved yet somehow flustered. "That's very considerate. It's your room now," he said simply. "As mistress of the house, you should have the best accommodations." The title mistress of the house sent a strange thrill through her. From homeless and disgraced to married and in charge of a prosperous ranch, all in a single day. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Frederick nodded, his expression softening slightly. "It's been an unusual day, you should rest. And tomorrow I'll show you the ranch. You should know the place you'll be calling home." Home. The word brought an unexpected lump to Katherine's throat. "I'll look forward to it." As promised, the next morning Frederick took Katherine on a tour of Silvercrest Ranch. The property was larger than she'd imagined, nearly 2,000 acres of prime grazing land, with Cottonwood Creek running through it, providing water even in the driest months. "The ranch has been in my family for 15 years, Frederick explained as they rode side by side, Katherine on a gentle mare he'd selected for her. "My father came out from Pennsylvania in '61, built it from nothing." "It's impressive," Katherine said, genuinely awed by the operation. Ranch hands tipped their hats as they passed, their curiosity about their boss's new wife evident but respectfully contained. "This is Tom Baker, my foreman," Frederick said, introducing a weathered man in his 40s who rode up to meet them. "Tom, this is Mrs. Ellis." "Madam," Tom said, touching his hat brim. "Welcome to Silvercrest." "Thank you, Mr. Baker," Katherine replied, conscious of how strange the introduction felt. Mrs. Ellis. A name and identity she was still struggling to inhabit. The tour continued, Frederick pointing out landmarks and explaining the ranch operations with quiet pride. Katherine listened intently, asking questions that seemed to surprise and please him with their insight. "You know something of ranching?" he asked as they paused by a stream where cattle had gathered to drink. "My father was a merchant, but he dealt in agricultural supplies," Katherine explained. "I used to help with his accounts and correspondence. I learned a bit about farming and livestock that way." Frederick nodded approvingly. Knowledge is never wasted. As they headed back toward the main house, Katherine gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "When will we go into town? People will be expecting to see your new bride." Frederick's expression grew serious. "Soon. There's no avoiding it. But we'll face them together." "And what will we tell them? About the suddenness of our marriage," he considered this. "The simplest story is often best. We've been corresponding for some time. You came to meet me and we decided not to wait. Corresponding, Katherine raised an eyebrow. How would we have met to begin? Threw Rebecca. She could have mentioned me to you at the boarding house. It's plausible enough. Katherine nodded slowly. And the child, Frederick's gaze was steady. Born early but healthy, that's all anyone needs to know. The directness of his answer both reassured and unsettled her. He had thought this through, prepared for the inevitable questions and judgments. For a man who claimed to care little for social convention, he understood its workings well enough. Their return to the main house was met by Rebecca's barely concealed anxiety. There you are. I was beginning to worry you'd gotten lost. Just showing Katherine the property, Frederick said, helping Katherine dismount. Well, Mrs. Fenton needs to discuss meal planning and there are household accounts to review, and Rebecca stopped, taking a breath. I'm overwhelming you already, aren't I? Katherine smiled, grateful for the other woman's attempt at normality. Not at all. I'm eager to learn the workings of the house. The next few days established a routine. Mornings were spent learning the household management from Rebecca, where supplies were kept, which vendors they used in town, how the ranch accounts were organized. Afternoons, Katherine would often accompany Frederick on rides around the property, absorbing knowledge about the cattle operation, meeting the hands, gradually becoming comfortable in her new role. Nights were solitary, as promised. Frederick kept to his room down the hall, unfailingly polite but maintaining a careful distance. Katherine found herself oddly disappointed by this, though she knew it was what they had agreed upon. There was something compelling about Frederick Ellis, a quiet strength, an unexpected gentleness beneath his reserved exterior. A week after their wedding, Frederick announced at breakfast that they would ride into Park City that afternoon. It's time, he said simply. We need supplies and people need to see us together. Katherine nodded, anxiety fluttering in her stomach. I'm ready. Rebecca squeezed her hand under the table. You'll be fine. Just remember you're Mrs. Frederick Ellis now. Hold your head high. The ride into town seemed far shorter than Katherine remembered. All too soon, they were pulling the wagon onto Park City's Main Street, the familiar buildings now looking somehow different, as if she were seeing them through a stranger's eyes. Mrs. Holloway's first, Frederick said, drawing the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. Might as well face the most talkative person in town immediately. Despite her nervousness, Katherine laughed. Strategic thinking. Frederick helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering supportively at her elbow. Together, he reminded her quietly. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store. Mrs. Holloway looked up from arranging fabric, her eyes widening at the sight of them. Mr. Ellis. And Miss Vaughn, my word. Mrs. Ellis now, actually, Frederick corrected, his voice pleasant but brooking no argument. Mrs. Holloway's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mrs., you mean to say, we were married last week, Katherine said, summoning every ounce of composure she possessed. A small ceremony at the ranch. Well, that's wonderful news, Mrs. Holloway managed, her expression a fascinating study in conflicting emotions, shock, confusion, calculation, and finally, a sort of reluctant acceptance. Congratulations to you both. Thank you, Frederick said. We'll need our usual monthly order, plus some extra fabric for Mrs. Ellis. She'll be making curtains for the east rooms. The mundanity of the request seemed to settle Mrs. Holloway. Of course. What kind of fabric were you thinking, dear? The conversation shifted to practical matters, though Katherine didn't miss how Mrs. Holloway's gaze occasionally dropped to her midsection, clearly doing the mental arithmetic that would soon become impossible to disguise. As they left the store with their purchases, Frederick leaned close. You handled that well. She's already counting the months, Katherine murmured. Let her count, he replied. By the time the child arrives, most will have accepted the situation. Their next stop was the doctor's office, a visit Katherine hadn't expected. Dr. Miller is discreet, Frederick assured her as they approached the small building. And it's important to establish your care early. Dr. Miller proved to be a kind-faced man in his 50s who greeted Frederick warmly and welcomed Katherine with genuine courtesy. Mrs. Ellis, a pleasure to meet you, and congratulations on your marriage. Thank you, Doctor, Katherine replied, grateful for his lack of visible judgment. I understand you're expecting, Dr. Miller continued as he showed them into his consultation room. How far along would you estimate? Katherine glanced at Frederick, who nodded encouragingly. About 4 months, she admitted. Dr. Miller nodded, making notes. Any concerns? Unusual symptoms? Some morning sickness still, though it's improving, and tiredness. Both normal, he assured her. I'd like to examine you if that's acceptable. Frederick stepped outside while Dr. Miller conducted his examination, returning when they were finished. The doctor pronounced Katherine and the baby healthy, recommending regular checkups as her pregnancy progressed. Thank you, Doctor, Frederick said, shaking the man's hand. We appreciate your care. It's my pleasure, Dr. Miller replied. And may I say, Mrs. Ellis is fortunate to have such a supportive husband. The words, though kindly meant, sent a pang through Katherine's heart. A supportive husband. If only the doctor knew the truth of their arrangement. By the time they left the doctor's office, word of their marriage had spread through Park City like wildfire. As they walked down the street, they received curious looks, a few congratulations, and several poorly concealed whispers. Outside the Mercantile, they encountered Mrs. Lancaster, Katherine's former employer. The older woman's face registered surprise, then a knowing look that made Katherine's cheeks burn. Mrs. Lancaster, Frederick nodded politely. Mr. Ellis, and Mrs. Ellis, I presume, the boarding house owner replied, her tone carefully neutral. Yes, Katherine said, meeting the woman's gaze directly. It's good to see you again. Indeed, quite a swift courtship, was it not? Frederick's hand found the small of Katherine's back. When you know, he said, his voice carrying just enough authority to discourage further comment. Mrs. Lancaster nodded stiffly. Well, congratulations to you both. As they continued down the street, Katherine exhaled slowly. That wasn't so bad. People will talk for a while, then find something new to gossip about, Frederick said. It's the way of small towns. Their final stop was the saloon, where Frederick needed to speak with the owner about a cattle sale. Katherine hesitated at the entrance. Perhaps I should wait in the wagon. Frederick considered this, then shook his head. No, if you're comfortable, I'd like you to come in with me. Show everyone that you're my wife, not someone to be whispered about. The respect in his voice gave Katherine courage. She straightened her shoulders. All right. The saloon fell quiet as they entered, conversations halting mid-sentence as heads turned toward them. Frederick nodded to several men, his hand protective at Katherine's elbow as he guided her to a table where a well-dressed man sat reviewing papers. James, Frederick greeted him. I'd like you to meet my wife, Katherine. Katherine, this is James Whitfield, who buys most of our beef for his hotels in Helena. James Whitfield stood, genuine surprise on his face. Wife? Ellis, you old dog, you never mentioned you were courting. He extended his hand to Katherine. A pleasure, Mrs. Ellis. Likewise, Mr. Whitfield, Katherine replied, grateful for his lack of obvious suspicion. The meeting proceeded smoothly, with Whitfield and Frederick discussing prices and quantities while Katherine listened attentively, occasionally offering an insight that earned her appreciative glances from both men. As they prepared to leave, Whitfield said, Ellis, you've done well for yourself. A beautiful, intelligent wife and the finest ranch in the territory. Some men have all the luck. Frederick's gaze met Katherine's, something unreadable in his eyes. Luck had nothing to do with it. The ride back to Silvercrest was quiet, both of them processing the day's events. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, painting the landscape in warm golds and reds. "You were magnificent today," Frederick said finally, breaking the silence. "Dignified, poised. No one would guess how recently your life was upended." Katherine looked over at him, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you, it was easier with you beside me." A slight smile curved his lips. "Partners then." "Partners," she agreed, the word feeling right somehow. Whatever their unusual beginnings, they were in this together now. That night, as Katherine prepared for bed, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Frederick standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," he assured her. "I just wanted to give you something." He held out a small wooden box. "It was my mother's. I thought you should have it as my wife." Katherine took the box, opening it to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful." "There's room inside for a small photograph," he explained. "I thought perhaps when the baby comes." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "Thank you, Frederick. I'll treasure it," he nodded, seeming pleased by her reaction. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night," she whispered, watching him walk down the hall to his room. As spring turned to summer, Katherine's body changed with the seasons. Her pregnancy became impossible to hide, though by then, most of Park City had accepted the Ellis marriage as fact, if not without some lingering speculation about timing. Life at Silvercrest fell into a comfortable rhythm. Rebecca had departed for Helena with her new husband, leaving Katherine truly in charge of the household. To her surprise, she found she had a talent for it, managing the staff, overseeing supplies, even helping Frederick with the ranch accounts. Frederick himself remained a mystery, in many ways unfailingly kind and respectful, increasingly attentive as her pregnancy progressed, yet maintaining the emotional distance they'd established at the beginning. Sometimes, Katherine would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster, only for him to look away when their eyes met. One evening in late July, Katherine sat on the porch swing, seeking relief from the heat that made the house stifling. Frederick joined her, offering a glass of lemonade. "Mrs. Fenton says you were in the garden most of the day," he said, concern evident in his voice. "You shouldn't overexert yourself." Katherine smiled, touching her rounded belly. "I'm pregnant, not invalid. Besides, the baby seems to like the activity." "Feel." Before she could reconsider the intimacy of the gesture, she took his hand and placed it where the baby was kicking vigorously. Frederick's eyes widened at the sensation, wonder transforming his usually composed features. "That's remarkable," he whispered. "It is, isn't it?" Katherine agreed, suddenly aware of how close they were, his hand warm against her through the thin fabric of her dress. Frederick didn't pull away immediately, his gaze moving from her belly to her face. "Katherine." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Tom Baker, riding hard toward the house. Frederick stood quickly, tension replacing the momentary softness in his expression. "Something's wrong," he said, moving to meet his foreman. Katherine watched anxiously as the two men conferred, Frederick's expression growing increasingly grim. When he returned to the porch, his jaw was set in a hard line. "What is it?" she asked. "Rustlers," he replied tersely. "They've taken at least 30 head from the north pasture. Tom and the boys are ready to ride after them." "You're going too," Katherine said, recognizing the determination in his stance. Frederick nodded. "We can't let this stand. Other ranches have been hit recently. The Samuelson place lost 50 head last month. Fear clutched at Katherine's heart. Isn't this something for the marshal to handle? Marshal Collins is 3 days' ride away in Billings, Frederick explained, already moving toward the house to gather his things. By the time he got here, the trail would be cold. Katherine followed him inside, watching as he checked his revolver and gathered ammunition. How dangerous will this be? Frederick paused, meeting her eyes directly. Rustlers don't surrender easily, but we'll be careful. When will you be back? Hard to say. A few days, possibly longer if they head into the mountains. He holstered his gun and placed a hand on her shoulder. Tom's wife Sarah will stay here with you and Mrs. Fenton. She's handy with a rifle if needed, though I don't anticipate trouble at the house. Katherine nodded, trying to hide her apprehension. This was ranch life, unpredictable, sometimes dangerous. Be safe, she said softly. Frederick's expression softened. I will. For a moment it seemed he might say more, but instead he squeezed her shoulder gently and turned to leave. Katherine watched from the porch as Frederick and 6 ranch hands rode out, their figures growing smaller against the vast Montana landscape until they disappeared from view. The next 3 days were the longest of Katherine's life. She kept busy with household tasks, reviewed the ranch accounts, and tried not to watch the horizon constantly for signs of Frederick's return. Sarah Baker proved to be good company, a no-nonsense woman with 3 children of her own who treated Katherine's pregnancy as a matter of course rather than scandal. First babies often come early, Sarah advised as they shelled peas on the porch. Best to have everything ready by month's end. Katherine nodded, though her due date was still some weeks away. I've been preparing the nursery, but there's still so much to do. Babies don't need much at first, Sarah said pragmatically. Just love and milk. She glanced at Katherine. You worried about Fred? Yes, Katherine admitted. Is it always this difficult when they ride out after trouble? Sarah smiled sympathetically. It gets easier, but you never stop worrying entirely. That's what it means to love a rancher. Love. The word caught Katherine off guard. Did she love Frederick? The question had been circling her mind more frequently of late. She respected him, certainly. Was grateful to him without question. Found him increasingly attractive, undeniably. But love. That seemed both too simple and too complicated a word for what was growing between them. On the 4th day, as twilight approached, Katherine was in the kitchen with Mrs. Fenton when they heard hoofbeats in the yard. She rushed to the door, her heart pounding, to see Frederick dismounting from his horse, looking exhausted but whole. Relief washed over her so powerfully that tears sprang to her eyes. She moved toward him without thinking, and he met her halfway, his arms encircling her awkwardly around her pregnant belly. You're back, she whispered against his chest, inhaling his scent of leather, sweat, and pine. We got them, he said, his voice rough with fatigue. Recovered most of the cattle, too. Katherine pulled back to look at his face, noting the cuts and bruises that hadn't been there when he left. You're hurt. Nothing serious, he assured her, though she could tell by the way he favored his right side that he was in more pain than he admitted. Come inside, she said, taking his hand. You need food and rest, and I need to clean those wounds. To her surprise, Frederick didn't protest, allowing her to lead him into the house where Mrs. Fenton already had hot water and food waiting. As the other men returned to their cabins or the bunkhouse, Katherine sat Frederick at the kitchen table and gently cleaned the gash on his temple and the scrapes on his knuckles. There was a fight, she said, not a question. Frederick nodded. We caught up to them near the territorial line. They didn't surrender peacefully. And the rustlers, 2 dead, 3 bound for the jail in Billings when Marshal Collins arrives. Katherine's hand stilled. You could have been killed, but I wasn't, he said simply. I had good reason to come home safely." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had voiced. Catherine's hand lingered on his, and for a moment the kitchen faded away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of shared understanding. The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, making Katherine gasp. Frederick's hand moved instinctively to her belly, a smile breaking through his weariness. "Someone's happy I'm home too," he said softly. "We both are," Katherine replied, covering his hand with hers. "More than I can say." That night, for the first time, Frederick kissed her properly, a gentle, questioning touch of his lips to hers as they stood in the hallway between their bedrooms. Katherine responded with a tenderness that surprised them both, her hands resting on his chest as they explored this new territory between them. When they finally separated, Frederick's eyes were dark with emotion. "I've wanted to do that for some time," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to feel obligated. Our arrangement has become more than an arrangement," she finished for him. "Hasn't it?" he nodded, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "Much more if you want it to be." "I do," Katherine said simply. "I didn't expect any of it, but I'm grateful for every part." Frederick smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "As am I." He kissed her again, then reluctantly stepped back. "You should rest. We have time." Katherine nodded, though part of her wanted to invite him into her room to explore this newfound intimacy further. But he was right, they had time. The baby would come first, and this fragile, growing love between them deserved patience. "Good night, Frederick," she said, smiling up at him. "Good night, Katherine," he replied, the way he said her name making it sound like a caress. August arrived with relentless heat and the most violent thunderstorm of the season. Lightning split the sky as rain pounded the ranch house roof. Katherine stood at the window of the parlor, watching nature's fury with fascination. "Should be good for the south pasture," Frederick commented, coming to stand beside her. "It's been too dry there." Katherine nodded, leaning slightly against him, still getting used to the casual affection that had developed between them since his return from pursuing the rustlers. "The garden will appreciate it too." A particularly bright flash of lightning was followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Katherine jumped, and Frederick's arm went around her waist protectively. "Just the storm," he murmured close to her ear. "I know," she replied. "It just startled." She stopped abruptly, a sharp pain radiating across her abdomen. Frederick felt her tense. "Katherine, what is it?" She took a deep breath as the pain subsided. "Nothing, just a twinge." But 20 minutes later, as they sat in the parlor listening to the rain, another pain came, stronger this time. Katherine gasped, clutching the arm of the sofa. Frederick was at her side instantly. "Is it the baby?" "I think so," she whispered, fear and excitement mingling in her voice. "But it's too early, nearly a month too early." Frederick's expression remained calm, though she could see concern in his eyes. "I'll send for Dr. Miller." In this storm, Katherine glanced toward the window where rain still fell in sheets. "The creek will be flooded." "Tom will find a way," Frederick said with quiet confidence. "He knows the high crossing." He moved quickly, calling for Mrs. Fenton while sending a ranch hand to fetch Tom Baker. Within minutes, the household was mobilized, water heating on the stove, clean linens gathered, a message dispatched to town for the doctor. As the pains increased in frequency and intensity, Katherine found herself grateful for Frederick's steady presence. He remained by her side, supporting her through each contraction, his voice a calming anchor when fear threatened to overwhelm her. "The baby will be fine," he assured her when she voiced her concern about the early arrival. "Ellis children are survivors." Ellis children. The simple phrase brought tears to her eyes. Despite knowing the child wasn't his by blood, Frederick had never once treated it as anything but his own. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The storm abated, but there was no sign of the doctor. Mrs. Fenton, who had assisted at many births, assured them everything was progressing normally, but Katherine could see worry behind the housekeeper's confident facade. As dawn approached, Katherine's labor intensified. Mrs. Fenton finally shooed Frederick from the room, despite his reluctance to leave. "This is women's work now, Mr. Ellis," she said firmly. "Sarah's here to help me, and we'll call you when it's time." The final stage of labor passed in a blur of pain and effort for Katherine. She was vaguely aware of Sarah Baker holding one hand Mrs. Fenton's capable presence between her legs, and her own voice crying out as she pushed with all her strength. And then, suddenly, a new sound filled the room, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "A boy," Mrs. Fenton announced triumphantly, lifting the tiny, red-faced infant for Katherine to see. A fine, strong boy. Exhausted but overwhelmed with joy, Katherine reached for her son. He was smaller than she'd expected, but his cry was robust, his tiny fists flailing in protest at the bright, cold world he'd entered. "Frederick," she whispered. "Please bring Frederick." Sarah hurried to the door, and moments later, Frederick entered, his face a study in barely contained emotion as he approached the bed. "You have a son," Katherine said, her voice breaking with happiness. Frederick sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his gaze fixed on the small bundle in her arms. With gentle fingers, he touched the baby's cheek, wonder transforming his features. "He's perfect," he said, his voice thick. "Would you like to hold him?" Katherine asked. The uncertainty that flashed across Frederick's face was quickly replaced by determination. "Yes," he said simply. As Katherine transferred the baby to Frederick's arms, she watched the man she had married out of necessity cradle her child with such tenderness that her heart felt too full for her chest. "What shall we call him?" Frederick asked, not taking his eyes off the infant. Katherine had thought of many names over the months, but in this moment only one seemed right. "William," she said softly, "after your father." Frederick looked up, surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "William Ellis," he tested the name. "It suits him." Mrs. Fenton and Sarah discreetly left the room, giving the new family a moment of privacy. In the quiet that followed, Katherine found herself studying Frederick's face as he gazed at the baby her husband in name who had become so much more. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could consider them. Frederick looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "And I love you, Katherine, have for some time now, even though this began as an arrangement." "Perhaps because of it," he replied thoughtfully. "We started with honesty and respect. Everything else grew naturally from there." The baby squirmed in his arms, making small, mewing sounds that would soon become cries for feeding. Frederick carefully returned him to Katherine, watching as she adjusted her nightgown to nurse. "I never thought I would have this," he admitted, watching the baby latch on. "A wife, a son, a family of my own." "Nor I," Katherine said softly. "Not after Thomas left." Frederick's expression darkened briefly at the mention of the man who had abandoned her. "His loss," he said firmly. "Our gain." As William nursed contentedly, Dr. Miller finally arrived, apologizing profusely for his delay. The creek had indeed flooded, forcing him to take the long route around the mountain. "But it seems you managed perfectly well without me," he observed after examining both mother and child. "The boy is small but healthy. With good feeding and care, he'll thrive." "He's an Ellis," Frederick said with quiet pride. "Of course he'll thrive." Dr. Miller departed with promises to return in a few days to check on their progress. As the household settled back into a semblance of routine, albeit one now centered around a newborn's needs, Katherine found moments of joy in watching Frederick adapt to fatherhood with the same determination he brought to everything. He insisted on having the cradle moved to their bedroom now, as he had moved his things in to be closer to Katherine and the baby. Though they had not yet resumed marital relations, they slept side by side, Frederick's arm often draped protectively across her waist, his breath warm against her neck. Word spread quickly through the territory about the birth of the Ellis heir. Visitors began arriving with gifts and congratulations. Neighboring ranchers, townspeople from Park City, even Rebecca and her husband made the journey from Helena. "He's beautiful, Katherine," Rebecca said as she cradled her nephew. "And you look well. Motherhood suits you." "Thank you," Katherine replied, watching Frederick across the room, deep in conversation with Rebecca's husband. "I never expected to be this happy." Rebecca's expression softened. "When Fred told me his plan to marry you, I thought he was mad. Now I see he was wiser than any of us knew." "We both were fortunate," Katherine agreed. "Not fortune," Rebecca corrected gently. "Choice. You both chose to make this work, to build something real from unusual beginnings." As summer gave way to autumn, life at Silvercrest adjusted to include William in its rhythms. The baby grew quickly, losing his initial frailty and developing into a robust infant with Frederick's blue eyes and Katherine's dark hair. Katherine recovered her strength and resumed her duties as mistress of the house, though now with William often nestled in a sling across her chest or napping in a basket nearby. Frederick took pride in showing off his son to visitors and ranch hands alike, and if anyone harbored suspicions about the child's parentage, they kept them to themselves. One crisp October evening, Katherine stood on the porch, William sleeping against her shoulder, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Frederick joined her, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Very," she replied, leaning into him. "Though sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed in a year." Frederick nodded, his gaze moving from the landscape to her face. "When I saw you that day in the general store, about to faint, I had no idea we'd end up here. Why did you help me?" Katherine asked, a question she'd wondered about many times. "You could have left me to Mrs. Holloway's judgment like everyone else would have." Frederick was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I saw something in you, dignity, even in your distress, courage," he smiled slightly. "And I couldn't bear the thought of this town destroying that. And now," she asked softly, "now I thank God every day that I was in that store at that moment," he said simply. "That I had the sense to recognize what was being offered to me, a pregnant, desperate woman with no prospects." Katherine said with a small laugh. "A partner," Frederick corrected, turning her gently to face him. "A wife who brings intelligence and grace to everything she does, a mother who loves fiercely." His voice lowered. "A woman I fall more in love with each day." Katherine shifted William to her other shoulder, freeing a hand to touch Frederick's face. "I never imagined I could be this fortunate to find a man who would accept me as I was, who would love a child not his by blood as if he were." "He is mine," Frederick said with quiet certainty. "In every way that matters." He covered her hand with his own. "As you are mine and I am yours." They stood together as twilight deepened, a family forged not from conventional beginnings but from choice and commitment that had blossomed into genuine love. Behind them, lamplight spilled from the windows of Silvercrest, illuminating the home they had built together. 5 years later, the Silvercrest Ranch had nearly doubled in size, its prosperity evident in the expanded barns. The new wing added to the main house and the quality of its breeding stock. Frederick Ellis had become one of the most respected ranchers in Montana Territory, known for his fair dealings and progressive farming methods. Katherine Ellis, once the subject of whispered speculation, was now a leading figure in the community, organizing the Park City School Fund, hosting social events at the ranch, and managing the household with quiet efficiency while raising 2 children. William, now 5, had been joined by a sister, Emma, who at 3 years old already showed signs of the same determination that characterized both her parents. To all appearances, they were the ideal family, prosperous, respected, and deeply bonded. On a warm June evening, Katherine sat on a quilt spread beneath the large cottonwood tree near the house, watching William and Emma chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Frederick joined her, settling beside her with a contented sigh. "Tom says the north pasture is recovering well after the rotation," he reported, stretching his legs out before him. "Should be ready for grazing again by month's end." "That's good news," Katherine replied, leaning against his shoulder. "The ledgers showed we're ahead of last year's profits already." Frederick smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "My brilliant wife, I'd be lost without your head for figures." "Hardly," she scoffed, though pleased by the compliment. "You managed well enough before me." "Survived, perhaps," he corrected. "Not thrived." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play. William had Frederick's build, tall for his age, with the same serious demeanor that occasionally broke into unexpected smiles. Emma was all Katherine, delicate features, but a stubborn chin and expressive eyes that missed nothing. "I had a letter from Rebecca today," Katherine said eventually. "She and John are expecting their 3rd child in December." "Good news," Frederick replied. "Though I still say they should move back to Montana. Helena's too far for family." Katherine smiled at his gruffness, knowing it concealed genuine affection for his sister and her growing family. "Perhaps they'll visit at Christmas this year." "Mama, Papa," William called, running toward them with something clutched carefully in his hands. "Look what I caught." Frederick made room on the quilt as their son knelt to show them a firefly glowing intermittently in his cupped palms. "Gentle now," Katherine reminded him. "Living creatures are fragile." William nodded solemnly, then opened his hands to release the insect. "Go find your family," he told it as it flew away. Emma toddled over to join them, her dark curls escaping from their ribbons. "Up, Papa," she demanded, arms raised imperiously. Frederick complied, settling her on his lap, where she immediately began playing with the buttons on his shirt. Katherine watched them, her heart full at the sight of this man who had become everything to her husband, partner, father to her children. "What are you thinking?" Frederick asked, catching her gaze. "How different things might have been," she admitted. "If you hadn't been in that store that day, if you hadn't offered me marriage, if we hadn't fallen in love." A shadow crossed his face. "I don't like to think about that." "Nor I," she agreed quickly. "But sometimes it overwhelms me how fortunate we are, how one decision changed everything." Frederick reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Not luck, choice. We choose each other every day, Katherine." As twilight deepened into night, they gathered their sleepy children and returned to the house, the home they had built together, from an arrangement that had blossomed into something neither could have imagined. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Katherine stood brushing her hair before the bedroom mirror. Frederick watched her from the bed, his expression reflective. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. Katherine set down her brush, turning to face him. "Regret what?" "Any of it. Coming west, marrying me under those circumstances." She crossed to the bed, sitting beside him. "How could I regret the choices that brought me William and Emma, that brought me you?" Frederick took her hand, running his thumb across her palm. "Sometimes I think about that man, Thomas." Katherine stilled, surprised. They rarely spoke of William's biological father. "What about him?" she asked cautiously. "I wonder if he ever thinks about what he left behind, if he knows what he lost." Frederick's voice was contemplative rather than bitter. "I wonder if he ever regrets his choice the way I'm grateful every day for mine." Katherine leaned forward, cupping his face in her hands. "Whatever his regrets might be, they're his burden to carry. We have built something beautiful from what he abandoned." Frederick nodded, turning to kiss her palm. "I thank God every day that you were pregnant and ashamed, and that I had the sense to tell you to hold your head high as my wife." Katherine smiled at the echo of words spoken years ago when their story began. "And I thank God every day that you did." As they settled into bed, Frederick's arm drawing her close against his chest, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate young woman with no options to a respected wife and mother. From a marriage of convenience to a union built on deep, abiding love. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around Silvercrest Ranch, where an unexpected beginning had transformed into a future neither could have imagined but one they had built together. Choice by choice, day by day, with love as its foundation.